This unit, well, there's nothing there yet, but this unit is going to cover this new creation of the Constitution, the new America, after the colonists had defeated the King of England and asserted their independence in the Revolutionary War. But first, to understand it, we got to remember, the colonists were very afraid of a government. This little colonist guy is clearly scared of this ghostly government figure that's super, super strong. And the colonists did not want a strong government because the King of England had created some problems for them back in their infancy. So, the colonists' problems with England. Quick review. First off, the King of England told the colonists that they are not allowed to settle past the Appalachian Mountains, the Proclamation of 1763. On the surface, it might seem like this is no big deal, but England had a problem with fighting the Native Americans out here west of the Appalachian Mountains, and the colonists, specifically these southern colonies, the colonists felt like they were being denied an opportunity to gain some wealth. After all, this is very, very rich and fertile land that they could farm. A lot of rich plantation owners owned all the land here. It created a big problem, and the colonists felt like they were being denied a chance to gain wealth. Second, the King of England was taxing various goods. The colonists did not like that they were having to pay more money for certain goods. And this leads to another issue: taxation without proper representation. What this means is the colonists, through certain taxes, they didn't get a chance to vote on those taxes. The king was denying them the right to vote on the laws that were going to govern them. This was violating their popular sovereignty. So, the colonists felt that their life, their liberty, and their property were also in danger if the king could pass these laws and tax their goods and their homes. They weren't safe, they didn't feel safe in those things, and they felt like their basic human rights were being denied. So, they fight England, we have a Revolutionary War, we end up with the new government for the first few years called the Articles of Confederation. A confederation itself, because the colonists are afraid of this government, they wanted to create a loose alliance of states. That's what confederation means. This loose alliance of states proved problematic though. It left all the power of the states and very, very little power to the federal government. For instance, they wanted the states to have the power, so the federal government itself was weak, which meant the federal government couldn't pass taxes. Never. Nope. Uncle Sam says no on tax day. Well, you got to think about this. How is the government going to pay for anything? How's the government going to function? How's it going to pay its basic workers if it can't even collect money in tax? They could ask the states, hey, would you mind giving us some taxes? But the states could say, nope, we are not going to give you anything. That kind of stinks. Doesn't even have the power to tax. Another issue is that the federal government couldn't have any currency. It couldn't establish currency. That seems like not a big deal, but each state was able to have its own currency. And you might run into this issue where people from Virginia didn't want to trade with people from Pennsylvania because they didn't know how much Pennsylvania's money was worth versus Virginia's money. No one knew how much anybody's money was worth, and it fluctuated so much. And the federal government had no control over this. They weren't allowed to set up money. I mean, imagine today the United States without having the dollar bill. We wouldn't have any way to trade or buy things in any other state we go visit. And so, these problems with England, these problems with the Articles of Confederation, it gets the people of the United States to realize all these things got to get thrown out. And they've got to come up with a new government. Do we have a strong federal government or a weak federal government? And we'll see there's a group called the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists that battle this out. So we're at this point now. We need to create a new government. We come up with a government, the colonists for the most part come up with a government, but there's some issues with it. And two sides emerge when it comes to actually ratifying this document. We have the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. What you must understand is that the Federalists were in favor of a strong central government. That's why I've put the picture of the Capitol building up there to associate with Federalists. The other side, the Anti-Federalists, they were against a strong central government. They wanted the power to remain with the states. If you know anything about your root words, anti means against. So the Anti-Federalists, they're against a strong central government. The Federalists felt that if the government was going to function, the government itself needed stronger powers than they were granted under the Articles of Confederation, like taxing and maintaining a military. The Anti-Federalists, they were afraid of a strong central government. Specifically in the Constitution, they were really afraid of two clauses, the Necessary and Proper Clause and the Supremacy Clause. And we'll learn more about those in a few minutes. But one thing these two sides both realized was the power of the media. At this time, there were no televisions, so these guys relied on newspapers and pamphlets to spread their word. The Federalists published a series of essays called the Federalist Papers. Specifically, they put them in New York's newspapers. New York was one of the most important states when it came to ratifying this new Constitution. And they said to the people of New York, they listed all these various reasons why the Constitution was necessary, why a federal government was necessary. The Anti-Federalists responded. These guys remained anonymous, though, for the most part. And these guys decided that they were going to spread the word to newspapers as well. And so the Anti-Federalists published their own series of papers called the Anti-Federalist Papers in order to convince the colonists and the people of New York specifically not to adopt the Constitution. And again, they said the Supremacy Clause and the Necessary and Proper Clause were two really scary pieces of the Constitution. So, quick overview in case you don't know what ratification means. Ratification in this case means to adopt or approve. So the colonists at this point had kind of come up with, specifically the Congress had come up with a document that they were going to submit for approval. They needed the states to vote on it and the states to agree to it. But the idea was, how much power should the government have? Is this the government we want, a strong federal government? And so the debate over ratification refers to the published and on the Congress floor arguments over how strong should the federal government be and what rights should we give the federal government and what rights should be guaranteed to remain with the people. We'll look more into those arguments here in a second. First lesson we're going to learn here. Mr. Kretz needs a color printer. Petition your administration so I can get a colored printer. Anyways, hand stuff. See, when you gain weight, your rings don't come off. Side note. So, how are the two sides, the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, how are they going to convince the people to adopt the Constitution or not? First, we have the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. These two sides decide that they're going to write papers to the newspapers. Once they get them published, they're going to argue their sides. They're going to tell the people the problems with the Constitution or why we should have the Constitution. The first one I want to look at is Federalist number 45. This is the 45th essay written by the Federalists to publish their opinions on the Constitution. They focus on a few key pieces of the Constitution. First, let's talk about the Necessary and Proper Clause. In Federalist 45, the Federalists say that the Necessary and Proper Clause is essential to give the government efficacy. And here's an example in black and white. The government, if it's going to have the power to wage war, then the government must also have the ability to raise an army. Think about it. How is it going to fight a war if it doesn't have an army? So again, the government must have the necessary and proper clause because it gives the government efficacy. Now, efficacy is the ability to make something happen if you decide it's important. In this case, if the government thinks that having a war or declaring war, which is one of its powers, is important, it must be able to raise an army and maintain a military. Second, the Federalists say the supremacy clause, which means anything that the government decides, is supreme. It's the law of the land. They say it's important because it's a basic characteristic of government. And I've given you an example. And please don't tell Mr. Hurley or Miss Thompson to look at my internet history, because I was searching pot leaves for about 15 minutes before I could find one I could actually print. But the example here is, if all the federal government says marijuana is illegal, no marijuana whatsoever, okay? So then in all 50 states, marijuana is illegal. It means that the states themselves cannot pass a law that says marijuana is legal. Recreational, medical, any of that. That means that the states are going against a federal government law. And if that's the case, the federal government itself is useless. If the federal government is not supreme, then there's no point in having a federal government whatsoever. It's a basic characteristic of government. In black and white, here it is. The Anti-Federalists, in response to the Federalists, tried to let people know that, hey, this federal government is a little scary if we give too many powers away to the state. If we give too many powers away to the federal government, we are reducing our sovereignty as states. They specifically had problems with the necessary and proper clause and supremacy clause. First, the necessary and proper clause. They think that it is a loophole, little roller coaster with a loop, for the federal government. Now remember, the Constitution only gives the government permission for what is specifically listed in the Constitution. So, it's a principle of limited government, right? The federal government can only do what the Constitution says it can. Well, that's tricky when we have the necessary and proper clause, because if the federal government decides, oh, this specific law is necessary and it's proper, then it gives them the authority to basically pass whatever laws and make whatever rules it wants. And they can just claim that it's necessary and claim that it's proper. Basically, who decides if it's necessary and proper? Then it adds even more issues with the supremacy clause. They say that, look, this supremacy clause gives the government a way to justify any law it wants. So follow along with me. The Federalists say, hey, the necessary and proper clause is a loophole. The government can make whatever law it wants, okay? And they can say it's necessary and they can say it's proper. And then if the states challenge that, well, the states can't challenge that law because of the supremacy clause. So hopefully you can see where this is going. The states will say, no, we don't like your law. The federal government says, it doesn't matter, we're supreme, you have to like our law. And then we're stuck in this loophole, and the federal government can do whatever it wants, justify whatever it wants, and now the states are useless. The colonists then are back to where they started, with spooky, scary government. Okay? This is a problem. What should we do? How are we going to get the Constitution ratified with these basic issues going on? Let's see. Whoosh. Wormhole my butt. There weren't any worms in that hole. That crazy guy calls himself a teacher. Let me tell you something. He couldn't teach a blind guy how to close his eyes. How does a blind guy know if his eyes are closed? Anywho. Oh! You must be all the children I was told to teach about anti-federalism. Let me tell you something. Don't listen to your teacher. Quack. Anyhow, a little backstory. We're afraid of the government. Well, I'll tell you, the government was a bad thing. The government really took advantage of us colonists. Well, we got cleverer towards the end. We realized the Constitution was going to be adopted. And we realized we were going to give all our powers, all of them, to the federal government. Well, we had one last trick up our schnocky old sleeves here. We told that government, we said, hey, new government, if you're going to do this, we want to make sure that there are some changes, amendments to be specific to this Constitution. We wanted things added, 10 of them. Well, a little more, but we settled on 10 things to be added to guarantee that the government could never take away our rights. We called those things rights. Bill of Rights. The first 10 amendments to the Constitution, and they were certain things like freedom of the press, religion, right to a trial. We don't want to house our soldiers. If we don't have to, it's our property. 10 things. Sometimes you could plead one of them, the 5th, if you were arrested. Those 10 things are known as the Bill of Rights, and those 10 things were exactly what we asked for, to guarantee that no government could ever rob us of our individual rights. We got one over on those guys, I'll tell you what. Do you hear that? I think one of those Federalists is coming. Better hide. Oh man, this is not what I thought it would be. This is a little bit crazy. All right, the guy said something about worms, holes. I like fishing, no big deal. I just thought I'd jump on in and see what the old cat had to offer, but he said I'd have to talk to a bunch of young chaps, future minds, Americans, if you will, and which was a weird thing because we didn't really call ourselves Americans back then. Well, you see, the Federalists, that's me, I'm a Federalist. Federalists. We thought this was cool, something's wrong with us, I don't know. Well, we Federalists, we realized we were going to win the fight. We were going to win the debate. We were better writers, we were better convincers, we were just all around better. Well, that Article of Confederation sure did suck. But we made some changes. We came up with a stronger government, federal government that is. In this federal government, we wanted to make sure that the government had power to adapt and change things. Well, that scared some of those anti-federalist fools. They wanted a Bill of Rights, 10 amendments to the Constitution. We thought, oh, that might be okay, but that might not be a good idea. There's other ways that could affect you guys if you don't know. For instance, we said in the Constitution that if the power is not listed here, the government has no business on it. But we tried to tell them, the second you write down certain things that the government cannot do, it's going to change the narrative of that Bill of Rights. They're going to start to say, well, in the Bill of Rights, you said that the government cannot remove freedom of speech. You say that the government cannot take away the right to petition. You say that the government cannot take away your right to bear arms. Not bear arms. Bear arms. Pew, pew. Okay. Guns, weapons. But what they don't realize is if we're listing all the things the government can't do, well, maybe the government's going to think, it's not listed in the Constitution, but they also did not list it in the Bill of Rights. So clearly, we might be able to affect this. It's going to lead to problems. Let me tell you, pretty soon the government might be trying to do things like take away their right to drink alcohol, or the government might do things like take away their right to vote. It could even give people the right to vote, like women. Oh boy. Betsy, I don't know if I want her voting because the other day I didn't take the cow out to pasture and she got pretty angry because the cow had some poor milk, and when I went to milk the cow, well, let's just say it didn't go well and Betsy was not happy with me. But that is why we were afraid, us Federalists. But as you know, I hear those 10 amendments were adopted and you've also added a few more, you crazies. All of you, crazy. But it's something that we won, we fought hard for, and now our country is stronger. Federal government. Your teacher, he seems to know a little bit, but I tell you, he's got a funny thing on his face. It's a beard, you say, and it's a little dark. It doesn't match his hair. Something about he needs to drop some pounds. I don't know. Seems like he's had one too many enchiladas in his day. Yeah, we don't know what the enchiladas are. I just read it in a newspaper somewhere. Oh! That looks like an anti-federalist. Those anti-federalists, they don't want a strong central government. They think that a strong central government is problematic. Yeah, but don't you remember how the King of England violated our rights? But don't you remember? But if we don't have a strong central government, the states, these United States, believe it, the government will take all of our rights. Take your rights. We'll see how that works out. The federal government would never take anyone's rights.